For 300,000 years, your ancestors woke up every morning with no algorithm to tell them what to do, no recommendation engine, no GPS, no search bar, no AI assistant to summarize the situation, model the decision, or predict the outcome. Just a brain. The same brain you are using right now to read these words, and a world that was trying in 100 different ways to kill them. They survived anyway. Not just survived, thrived, built language, built culture, built trade networks spanning continents, solved problems of stunning complexity with nothing but memory, observation, social cooperation, and the capacity to reason under conditions of radical uncertainty. They crossed oceans without instruments. They tracked animals across landscapes for days using nothing but pattern recognition and inference. They negotiated the social dynamics of tribal life, the alliances, the betrayals, the hierarchies, the rituals, with a sophistication that modern organizational psychology is still trying to fully map. And then, in the span of a single human lifetime, we handed most of that cognitive work to machines. The question nobody is asking loudly enough is not whether automation makes us more productive. It does, in measurable ways, for measurable tasks. The question is, what happens to the 300,000-year-old cognitive toolkit that powered human survival when it stops being used? To understand what your ancestors were actually doing for 300,000 years, you need to understand the environment they were doing it in. Evolutionary biologist Richard Wrangham at Harvard University has spent decades studying the cognitive demands of the environments in which Homo sapiens evolved. His research suggests that the social and ecological complexity our ancestors navigated was, in many respects, more cognitively demanding than anything most modern humans encounter in daily life. Consider what it actually meant to survive as a hunter-gatherer. You needed to maintain detailed mental maps of territories spanning hundreds of square kilometers, tracking not just where resources were, but when they would be available, how availability changed with season and weather, and how that availability was likely to change in the future based on patterns you had observed over years. You needed to track the behavior of dozens of animal species, their habits, their reactions to human presence, their vulnerabilities, their seasonal movements, with a depth of knowledge that modern wildlife biologists acquired through years of formal study and technological assistance. You needed to manage complex social relationships within a group of approximately 150 people. Dunbar's number again. Tracking alliances, obligations, reputations, status hierarchies, and the subtle emotional states of people whose cooperation was essential to your survival. And you needed to do all of this simultaneously, continuously, under conditions of genuine physical danger, with no external system to offload any of it to. Anthropologist Louis Liebenberg at the University of Cape Town has spent 30 years studying the tracking practices of the San people of the Kalahari, one of the oldest continuous cultures on Earth, whose tracking traditions offer a window into the cognitive practices of our distant ancestors. What Liebenberg found disturbed and fascinated him. Tracking, at the expert level practiced by San hunters, is not a mechanical skill. It is not a matter of following obvious footprints from point to point. Expert tracking requires what Liebenberg calls speculative tracking, the construction of a detailed mental model of an animal's behavior, psychology, and likely decision-making, then using that model to predict where the animal will be, not where it was. In plain English, expert trackers do not follow animals. They think like animals. They build internal simulations of another creature's mind and use those simulations to navigate uncertainty in real time. This is not a primitive skill. It is one of the most sophisticated cognitive operations a human being can perform. It requires the integration of sensory observation, spatial memory, ecological knowledge, pattern recognition, predictive modeling, and the ability to update all of these simultaneously as new information arrives. Liebenberg has argued, controversially but compellingly, that this kind of tracking may be the evolutionary origin of scientific reasoning itself. The same cognitive operations that allowed our ancestors to predict where a wounded kudu would collapse. Hypothesis, observation, inference, revision are the same operations that underpin experimental science. Your ancestors were not primitive. They were running one of the most sophisticated cognitive operating systems ever developed. They just did not have a name for it. Now consider what happened to that cognitive operating system over the past century. The internal map, the detailed spatial knowledge of a territory built through direct experience, was replaced first by paper maps, then by GPS systems that not only navigate for you, but actively discourage the cognitive work of building your own spatial model. Research by neuroscientist Eleanor Maguire at University College London, studying London taxi drivers before and after the introduction of GPS navigation, found measurable differences in hippocampal structure between drivers who navigated from memory and those who relied on devices. The brain region most associated with spatial memory was physically larger, more developed, in the drivers who did the cognitive work themselves. The social tracking, the continuous monitoring of dozens of relationships, reputations, and emotional states, was supplemented and in many cases replaced by digital platforms that manage social information algorithmically. Your phone tells you whose birthday it is. Your calendar manages your commitments. Your feed curates the social information you receive. The cognitive labor of maintaining a genuine social map, of knowing your people deeply enough to anticipate their needs, read their states, and respond with appropriate nuance, is increasingly offloaded to systems optimized not for social depth, but for engagement. The ecological knowledge, the accumulated understanding of how the natural world works, built through direct observation across seasons and years, has been replaced for most people by a search bar. You do not need to know how weather forms to know whether to carry an umbrella. You do not need to understand ecosystems to know what to eat. The knowledge exists externally, available on demand, and therefore does not need to be built internally. Each of these replacements is, in isolation, an efficiency gain. Collectively, they represent something more significant: the systematic outsourcing of the cognitive operations that defined human intelligence for 300,000 years. But here is where the story becomes genuinely interesting. The cognitive capacities that automation is replacing are not arbitrary. They were not random features of the ancestral environment that happened to be selected for. They were specifically the capacities that allowed human beings to navigate complexity, uncertainty, novelty, and social dynamics. Exactly the domains where AI systems remain most limited, and exactly the domains that are becoming most valuable in an automated economy. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi at Claremont Graduate University spent decades studying what he called flow, the state of optimal human experience that occurs when cognitive challenge and cognitive capability are precisely matched. His research consistently found that the activities most associated with deep human satisfaction and meaning are precisely those that require genuine cognitive effort: problem solving, creative work, skilled performance, complex social navigation. In plain English, the things that make human life feel most worth living are the things that require you to use your brain at full capacity. And those are exactly the things that automation is most aggressively removing from daily experience. This is not an argument against automation. It is an argument for understanding what automation costs, not economically, but cognitively and experientially, and making deliberate choices about which costs you are willing to pay. Your ancestors survived for 300,000 years without automation because they had no choice. Every cognitive capacity they possessed was exercised daily under conditions of genuine consequence. You could not outsource your spatial memory to a device and still find water. You could not outsource your social intelligence to an algorithm and still maintain the alliances that protected your children. You could not outsource your ecological knowledge to a search engine and still know which plants were safe to eat. The constraints that made their lives harder also made their minds stronger, not through suffering for its own sake, but through the daily, unavoidable practice of the full range of human cognitive capacity. The question for your generation, the first generation in human history to live in an environment where most of the cognitive challenges that shaped human intelligence can be delegated to machines, is a simple one. What do you choose to keep? Not what you are forced to keep. Not what remains after automation has taken everything it can reach. What do you deliberately, consciously, intentionally preserve? Because you understand that the practice of those capacities is not just economically valuable, but is itself a component of what it means to live a fully human life. Here is the counterintuitive truth. The most valuable human beings in an automated world are not the ones who have delegated the most to machines. They are the ones who have preserved, through deliberate practice, through chosen difficulty, through the willingness to do things the hard way when the easy way is available, the cognitive capacities that 300,000 years of survival built into the human operating system, the navigator who can read stars, the doctor who can diagnose without imaging, the negotiator who can read a room, the leader who can build genuine trust in a world of curated digital personas. These are not nostalgic skills. They are the frontier skills of an automated economy, precisely because they are the skills that automation cannot replicate. Researcher Joseph Henrich at Harvard University, in his landmark work, The Secret of Our Success, argues that human beings are uniquely distinguished from other species not by individual intelligence, but by cumulative cultural learning, the ability to build on the knowledge and skills of previous generations through imitation, teaching, and practice. The 300,000-year cognitive toolkit your ancestors built was not the product of individual genius. It was the product of cumulative learning across thousands of generations. Automation, at its most aggressive, threatens to interrupt that cumulative chain. If each generation outsources more cognitive work than the previous one, if the practice of deep navigation, complex social judgment, ecological awareness, and speculative reasoning is progressively delegated to machines, then the chain of cumulative cognitive development that built human intelligence over 300,000 years begins to thin. This is not inevitable, but it requires intentionality to prevent. Organizations like Pinnacle AI Solutions exist at exactly this intersection, not to resist automation, but to help individuals and organizations understand what automation is replacing, what it cannot replace, and how to make deliberate choices about the relationship between human cognitive capacity and machine capability. Because the future does not belong to people who use AI the most. It belongs to people who understand what AI cannot do, and who have kept those capacities sharp. For 300,000 years, your ancestors woke up every morning with no algorithm to tell them what to do. They built spatial maps from direct experience. They tracked animals by thinking like them. They maintained complex social worlds through genuine attention and care. They accumulated ecological knowledge across generations through practice and observation. They solved problems of stunning complexity with nothing but the cognitive toolkit that evolution had built, and that daily survival continuously sharpened. That toolkit is still inside you. Every capacity your ancestors developed is still encoded in the architecture of your brain, waiting to be used, ready to be strengthened, capable of depths of performance that most people in the automated world never discover. The question is not whether you have what your ancestors had. The question is whether you choose to use it.